Saturday night ding-dong ditch sessions were one of the numerous boisterous and naughty activities that my troublemaking pals and I would engage in when we were 13 years old. We all shared a block in a normal suburban community 10 years ago. However, there were a lot more forests and fewer homes at the time. For the sake of this narrative, I will make up names for my friends: Mark, James, and Matt. Usually it was either James or Mark who went up to the houses and rang the bells. In contrast, Matt and I would often immediately locate hiding places. About 5 or 6 houses were affected. I recall that every man who answered the doors reacted essentially in the same way. 1 or 2 of them would shout something as they stepped out upon the porch, and then they would return inside. To get a better response, we would ring the bell again for a few houses. We all booked it down the street and moved to the next block over when one guy shouted that he was calling the police a second time. As I previously stated, this neighborhood had wooded areas where homes now stand 10 years ago. The houses on the next block over appeared to be more run down, and several of the residences were surrounded by small wooded areas. An ideal hiding place was the wooded area across the street from the first house on the block. Tall grass, a shabby old automobile with a cover in the driveway, and a generally modest dwelling gave the place a rather dilapidated appearance. Mark approached the bell to ring it. The door opened before he had a chance to cross the street. Another man, who was rather large, roughly 6 feet tall and stocky, answered the door. He was angry right away, unlike the others. He shouted threats as he strolled around his whole front yard, inspecting the bushes. As usual, we all chuckled. After a while, he returned inside. After checking the windows and waiting for a few minutes, Mark hurried back up the stoop to ring the bell once again. I wouldn't dare ring that man's bell again. Therefore, I wasn't envious of him for having this house. Mark fled to the side of the house and out of sight, realizing that he most likely didn't have much more time. This time, the door opened far more quickly, and the man emerged with a weapon. We all exchanged glances while exclaiming, "Oh, under arrest." The man looked in all the locations he had previously examined, plus a few more this time, such as behind his car and a few trees. He then proceeded to the middle of his lawn and remained still, seemingly lost in thought. He turned to face us in the woods and glanced around before stopping. James, Matt, and I exchanged glances. Hoping he wouldn't notice, we ducked lower. The man stared at us for 10 seconds before returning to his house. Then we spotted him again, standing motionless like a statue in the woods, staring at us from his front window. There was nothing we could do, but he noticed Mark slinking back toward the man's front door. We were too scared to shout or move. Mark dashed for it after ringing the bell one more. But for another minute, the man remained still. After then, he turned and left the window. Even though we didn't see Mark again, we were still too frightened to speak or move. The next thing I recall is when we heard Mark shouting, "Run!" from across the street. We didn't realize until we heard a figure approaching from behind and turned to see it was the man from the other side of the street who was pointing his weapon at us. To get to Mark, who was waiting for us across the street, we fled like little animals from a predator. Until we were certain we had lost him, we ran for blocks. Mark said that he shouted when he noticed the guy slinking across the street with his rifle into the wooded area. He and everything that occurred were not reported by us. We just told a select group of pals. Fortunately, we never actually had to pass the home again because it was located many blocks away. For a few weeks, I resided in a house straight out of hell. My parents were paying for a house for me to live in while I was a college student. It was an untouched one, I know. The house wasn't particularly large or ostentatious, but I was content with it for the first several days at least. Then, things soon began to become odd. I spent many hours watching TV on a dreary Saturday when I had nothing better to do. I heard a scratch on the floor of my living room at that moment. Thinking that an animal had broken into the home or something, I glanced around the room. I took a seat again and went back to watching TV. That was the first strange thing that happened. The rain persisted for the remainder of the day and into the night, providing a justification for staying indoors. I remained inside and continued to watch TV in the living room. When I thought I heard something coming from the kitchen, I became alert. Ironically, I brought a pillow along as a weapon of some kind and proceeded to the kitchen doorway. A box of Cheerios lay on the floor in the center of the dimly lit kitchen, spilling out hundreds of the little O's. How it could have happened was beyond me. Still, I let the cushion fall and started picking up the Cheerios off the floor. While I was doing this, I heard a creak, which is the sound made when someone treads on a wood floor's weak spots. By the kitchen table, that is. When I raised my head, no one was there. Every sound must have been making me paranoid, and I knew I was going insane now. After cleaning the Cheerios, I resumed watching TV. The majority of the storm appeared to be passing overhead, and the thunder outside was growing louder. Yet, I was oddly calm. Appreciating the sound of the storm outside before waking up from what felt like an hour-long slumber is the last thing I recall. I wasn't awakened by the TV being on, though. I seem to recall thinking I awoke to a thump or a blast coming from downstairs. In any case, I walked upstairs to bed after turning off the television. The following day and the day after that were both typical. Strange things didn't start happening again until the next wet, dark day. I felt like I had been drinking all night the night before when I woke up in bed that morning. I was feeling more ill than I had ever experienced with a hangover. That day, the dismal, dark weather just made me feel more bedridden, so I didn't do any walking. I had a garbage pail by my side in case I had to throw up, and I kept the TV on in my bedroom all day as background noise. I muted the TV around noon after hearing noises coming from the attic, which is above me. The majority of the attic was constructed over my bedroom, which was really where the attic door was located. I believed I heard 3 or 4 times, not just once. Even though I felt like throwing up every time I moved, I was still able to get out of bed. I lowered the attic door's cord, grabbed one of my old baseball bats, and ascended the stairs. To illuminate the attic, I lowered the light switch. I could not find any live things to make such noises, but there were a few old boxes that may have belonged to the previous owner strewn about. I was a little afraid of the attic, so I hurried back down. Until that night, no sounds were heard. When I initially woke up, I assumed it was thunder. The familiar sound of a thump coming from up in the attic chilled me, even though I was still feeling a little queasy. After lowering the attic door's cord, I picked up my baseball bat and ascended the stairs. I raged and yelled in the loudest voice I could manage, but before I could switch on the light, I heard a child laughing in the dark attic. There are no words to express how it feels to be weightless, like if my body were descending from my insides. The term fear is insufficient to express the level of terror I had at that precise time. I don't even remember running since I left that house so quickly. In the freezing rain, I called my dad and asked him to come get me. I gave the best explanation I could. When I told my folks how upset I was about this, I think they kind of believed me. The following day, my dad and I packed up everything we owned and returned home. I still firmly believe that my experiences in that house were entirely paranormal.